Who is protecting who? That's a question in Plague Tale Requiem, one of the better games of 2022 that at times is also intensely frustrating that it doesn't rise above some of the problems that just don't really need to be there and continue to reflect the issues that we saw in the original game. Let's begin. So Amicia and Hugo are in a smorgasbord of fuckery, the likes of which we haven't seen since the first game, and like any sequel, that works better if you pump up the action and suspense and murder and risk from the original. What works better than that? Nothing. Plague Tale Requiem follows Hugo, afflicted still with the dark magic of the macula, and his consistent protector Amicia as they continue to seek out some kind of cure for his ills, and in the meantime use Amicia's face as a shield for 10 plus hours. If Amicia, though, is a shield, Hugo's the plague version of the Pied Piper, skippering through the levels, controlling the rats. But imagine if the Pied Piper stopped and instead of the kids waking up, they turned on him and ate him down to his shoes. That's Plague Tale. The original game showcased Amicia and Hugo running for their lives from both enemies and killers, as well as that dark power that was afflicting Hugo, letting him have an innate connection with the plague and rats within the game world. Requiem dives deeper into that story, as well as doling out new powers, instruments of killing, and enemies. But it's not always as smooth as it should be. First, the world and the narrative continue to be excellent as you walk with that exaggerated swagger of a girl in a young charge in ancient France, walking through towns, taking in the finery, and then usually leaving a desiccated empty shell of the town's former self, because if bad luck had an icon all cultures could understand, it'd be a drawing of Hugo's big-ass bug eyes. That dude is pure misfortune. And when they open the reverse fortune cookie of powers again, and Amicia says, "It's happening again," and you realize that's not just a one-off, it's a reflection of almost everything in the game world. And world is a proper term. Requiem is spanning. It has the twins and a collection of occasional travelers moving with them across a new part of France. It's an epic story, stretching when it needs to and contracting down into spaces and places with peaceful downtime when the pacing gets just a bit too frantic and it lets everything breathe for a moment. Has anything changed from the original? Well, not when it comes to the gameplay. It's still stealth, story, and, in the end, some combat. With Hugo's powers, he soon learns how to control rats, though this takes a while into the game before he can do so, driving them around like a rat truck and smashing other humans, eating them whenever the rats find them, while Amicia is the stealthy killer who doesn't want to be a killer, consistently explaining how bad she feels when cracking some dude in the dome from 100 yards away with a rock, then putting down his torch so he can be mulched by a four-legged chipper shredder flesh machine known as the Rat Hordes. It never stops being entertaining with her explaining continually how bad she feels while doing this. It intersperses the more aggressive ways of taking out enemies, though, as well when it comes to the stealth. And the stealth continues to be the game's fine point. While it's a bit softer at times than other games, which can occasionally see you being noticed by guards when you really don't think you should be, or walking into the shadows just a bit too far and having the rats eat you, it still works excellent with that interplay of light and shadow, both man-made and natural, as the perfect crux on which the game's gameplay balances with the presentation. However, it also feels more forced than the original, especially the larger human chess pieces that are stretched out a bit too big. It's like moments in the Queen's Gambit where you just wanted it to actually get moving and tell a bit more of the story. While I love the game's play off the characters' motivations as a crucial part of the level design, there are times when finding just one more place that's a puzzle piece grew a bit stale. Requiem tries to change things up, chase scenes, battle sections, bosses, and an assortment of one-offs, but it also delights in throwing you into a spot where the first thing you think of is, Section A goes into Section B, and that makes a medieval IKEA piece. Right after that, you'll begin exploring some 14th century France fair where the biggest thing that day is going to be a bunch of cows being shown and everybody deciding which one's the coolest. At that point, you might as well just celebrate the big rock you found in a field by tripping over it. It's a boring land, but these people that you explore within it are so excited just to be alive. And there's this cool dichotomy you feel from the battle sections to some of the more populated places that you go to. It also makes you feel a little bit bad for the enemies, though. Amicia and Hugo, the protagonists who are supposed to be underpowered, have slings and tars and rocks, knives, upgrade benches, fire, and rats. The enemy forces usually have a torch and sometimes a weapon. That's it. Makes you wonder how crap their boss is if you realize that these guys are going to go out there and most of them can't even get out of the puzzle piece sections alive. As you continue to gain skills and abilities to make more equipment, most of them having a duality of use, the game does stretch itself a bit more, as puzzle pieces are also ways to kill enemies, and so are the equipment. For example, tar can create a nice bonfire when you need it, but at times can be used to move rat hordes around. Saltpeter can be put on a light, giving you some stealth, but at the same time put onto an enemy's torch, getting them eaten. So just like the game's original sling, not only can it be a diversion many times, but it can also knock somebody out. Luckily, the storytelling has that dexterity that I think a lot of big games wish that they did. And a lot of that just hinges on the way the game is presented to you. You're walking through them, experiencing all of these different worlds at the same time, and then sneaking behind the back door of some location and seeing the seedy side of the circus, where this is the real way in which the village works. And I like that dichotomy, the front end that's all polished and behind it that's a bit rusty. And the game's consistently told and experienced through these two characters, the de facto protector, Amicia, and the brunt of protection on her brother, but giving these subtle hints all the time that the breaks are starting to happen no matter how many times she tries to tell everybody she's okay. That's when you realize protecting and loving has been replaced in this game by something far darker. Obsession and loss. The loss of self. It's highlighted here not just in the slow wasting away of Amicia herself as a character and the damage done to her, but the almost drug-like seeking that highlights her continued protection of Hugo. Not just that she needs to do so, but that she needs him. Every time you pick up something in the game world, every cool thing you notice, every flower you put in your hair, she says something like, I bet Hugo would like this. It's through this mirror darkly stuff that the game continues to present an amazing narrative that's also told through Hugo himself. He's grown on me. That character grows under the weight of this insane pressure, yet still somehow finds the joy of just being a kid, reacts to Amicia's games and jests with a true delight even after the monsters under the bed flip it over, eat it, and then shit out an entire new nightmare for him to experience. His demonstration of innocence within those, and the innocence being lost by Amicia, continues from the original game and just is highlighted at every point within the game. You also see that same duality of items being weapons, but here it's two characters slowly seeping into one another, fading, and in some ways now standing opposite one another, like two people missing a psychic high five and now standing where the other person stood. When it comes to the graphics, they tell an incredible story, and they need to for Plague Tale Requiem. For the most part, Plague Tale Requiem looks incredible. The push and pull of mud on a character, rain coming down the walls and stoops of roofs. The biggest improvement here, though, is the foliage system in the levels, as well as the city's architecture. Stuff that we saw in the original game, but it has blossomed out in this game to an incredible extent. The gentle slopes of homes built so that the nastiness can drain downwards to clutches and catchments. The people all over the place selling meats. Later, the cataclysmic moments when everything goes to absolute hell. It's most telling when the characters are walking together, though, discussing the world, their lives, dreams, and terrors, and the game's ability to let nothing be said, but to tell a story with nothing more than characters' looks. This is at the level that we see in, say, The Last of Us, or something of that type, and sure, this isn't a AAA game with that amount of budget or polish, but it does a very good job with what it has. And that excellence means it looks stunning, like a movie that's a game, pretending to be a movie. While it does still have the occasional animation pops from time to time, especially when you're using an item in the game world, like a ladder or a ramp, it's impossible not to be impressed, though, with the depth and construction of a city, or the lighting, the mist, the particulate, and the fog as you sneak up on some enemy and add another hole to their body, hoping that they can't breathe through it. It's a dark time and a nasty time, and nothing says that better than an entire pig carcass hanging out in front of an inn sign. Because good graphics, if they don't really make you feel like it's a real place, just don't work at all. Now, the game's graphical options run from contact shadows to texture detail, as well as effects and lighting and DLSS. It's very graphics heavy when it comes to your video card, though, and it's noticeable in some really big FPS drops, especially when you get closer to the rat hordes that don't really hit the CPU. It's awesome to have what looks like millions of them on screen, but not so much when you lose like 20 to 25 frames per second at those parts. Draw distances and design are incredible throughout, but I would like to have seen an optimization go on here so that during those big moments you don't have the huge drops which weren't noticeable anywhere else. And all of that presentation, the stealth, the combat, and the story are matched by the audio.
We're not with those men. You live here? Yes. What is that? They're here. Don't drop the torch. As long as you have it, they can't hurt you.
Lucas, come, right now.
Coming.
I heard Hugo cry.
What's going on?
He didn't react well. He's having a seizure.
What? Mother, you must stop this. We don't know this man. Amicia.
because without good audio, a game can suffer, and it would hit this game in particularly very hard. The game's music is this odd mix of risk and theme, and then pumping in stingers in the middle that remind you forcibly of that moment when Arnold Schwarzenegger busted through a mall with a shotgun and roses, but this time replace him and the liquid metal Doral from Virtua Fighter with rats. How many rats? Every rat. The music's dire theme drones on. There's a wicked smashing stinger that'll elevate the action one moment, and then it'll sort of fade away into these more momentary restful bits that starts to creep in. And it does this awesome job of tricking you into thinking, hey, you know what, man? Everything might be okay. But if you've ever seen Firestarter, or if you're not 50 years old and you've seen a superhero movie, you know that everyone's powers are going to eventually not stay in the shadows. There's always some idiot who comes along and gets them caught, and that's what happens here. Those moments in the game are matched continually throughout on a soundtrack that is just spot on. Just listen to these wicked, discordant, almost backwards sections here.
Yes, I need to breathe. We have to get out of here one way or another.
It's like you can imagine everybody in a stringed instrument section being told to play like zombies, all stuck in the scariest loop ever. And that's reflected also by the characters in A Dire Story as well, something I talked about earlier when it comes to presentation, but the voices Requiem builds on is an excellence. You got the Whisper twins, this only makes them better. The banter back and forth, the emotion, the passion, the characters' feelings are all pinned down to a perfect note almost throughout the entire game. Sure, Amicia is consistently sounding like she's losing her mind, talking to herself more than Deacon from Days Gone ever did, but it's awesome. And then you got Hugo's traversal from pain to childhood innocence at seeing some frogs to the horror that friends feel when they notice someone else slipping into darkness around them. Every character and that delivery is very, very good. And that also includes the audio work for the sound. It's excellent. The first time you hear the rumble and burble of the rat hordes, it's low, it grows and builds up in and out of your speakers until you're a bit stressed out, wondering when are they going to finally actually burst out, then boom. Same goes for fire, arrows, a scurrying movement from rat and man alone, and of course, the deathly gurgle somebody lets out when you come up behind them and stab them. Very good sound, very good voice, very good music. Now, how does all this come together? Well, that's about fun factor, and this is where Requiem can be a little long in the tooth. It builds on a great deal of the original, but it can be daunting. I love the stealth, the combat, and yes, even a couple of the more difficult battles. They did a pretty good job making sure that the levels are bigger than the original game, but aren't too big. However, there's also that very unfortunate invisible wall issue that does pop up that keeps the player pinned down in some spots. Especially in the later half of the game, you'll also notice that the idea of a new location and that stretching a logic to its breaking point when you see 3 hanging bags of lumber just there for nothing more than Amicia to turn into bonfires for strategic moments. It shows that while you can nail every factor of a game, the most excellent of mechanics can still be a bit rusty, like a good machine used for just a bit too long without some good maintenance. Just when those moments popped up, luckily Requiem seemed to know it and move that story to the forefront, but they are noticeable here, and certainly more than the original. But it continued to be enjoyable. Sure, there were parts that were a little offbeat, but this is a title and the entire presentation just sings to me. I love these characters. I like the stealth, and you can't go wrong, and you certainly can't argue the merits of handholding, especially when Amicia and Hugo take down like what can only be described as every single bad guy in their escape. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. This is also on Game Pass. It's well worth getting no matter how you can get it. I enjoyed this game. I thought it was awesome. It did have more breaks than I think the original did, but the original was a tighter package overall. This one's a little bit looser in its presentation, and certainly you will notice that. Also, I would love to see that presentation stepped up. The idea that a 3080 is missing a good number of frames, especially when a lot of those rats show up, means that there's some optimization there. However, even turning this game very low in the settings still nets in a game that looks phenomenal, and you cannot argue against the architecture, the feeling of France back in the days when the plague was heady and the rats were high. I just really thought this game looked and played awesome. So anyway, that's it for me. Expect to see more reviews this week. Subscribe, hit the notify all, check out the Patreon if you can. It really will help, especially as YouTube has just tried to pretty much crater the channel. So anything you can do, if you want to spread the word, post it on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, what have you, it would be very appreciated. Also, if you like to know how games are made and you're interested in that, check out the Walking the Walk series on the channel, where I look at games, talk to developers, and walk through a game at walking speed and describe how they tried to make a game world really reflective of what a player wanted to see. Also, if you're interested in indies, once a week I do the Eyes on Indies titles, and you'll be able to see anywhere from 8 to 15 new titles every week for indie titles if that's your game. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.